Sit up, you're on film. So droopy. Why do you look so sad? Oh, because SPD isn't recognized as a real disorder? Yeah, me too. Hello, my name is Blair, welcome back to my channel, and welcome back to the Sensory Awareness series. Today is day 13, and we're going to be doing a little more of an exploring a question type video, and the question we're going to be talking about today is SPD real? But first, a history lesson. Don't worry, I'll try to make it not boring. In the early 1960s, the occupational therapist Dr. Anna Jean Ayres described and named what she called sensory integration dysfunction, which included 6 symptoms: dyspraxia, poor bilateral integration, which is the ability to coordinate both sides of your body, tactile defensiveness, visual perceptual deficits, auditory language problems, and somatodyspraxia, which is a specific type of dyspraxia related to how your body interprets touch, vestibular, and proprioceptive sensations. She was the one to develop the sensory integration framework that so many occupational therapists use today. And she developed a set of tests called the sensory integration and praxis tests for assessing sensory processing abilities. This was the only model for quite a while. Then, in 1997, Dr. Winnie Dunn, who is a prolific scholar of sensory processing, developed another model to use to classify sensory issues. She measured sensory issues using 2 different aspects: the response type, which could be active or passive, and the sensory threshold, which could be high or low, and this created 4 subtypes: high threshold passive response, or low registration; high threshold active response, or sensory seeking; low threshold passive response, or sensory sensitivity; and low threshold active response, or sensory avoiding. She also developed the sensory profile tests for assessing sensory processing abilities. Rather than being only traditional testing, these also add in information from parent reports and clinical observations. A few years later, in 2007, Dr. Lucy Jane Miller, who had been a student of Ayres, proposed that the name be changed to sensory processing disorder. She and her co-authors said in an article, "The use of the term sensory integration often applies to a neurobiologic cellular process rather than a behavioral response to sensory input." Dr. Miller developed the subtype model that I explained on day 1, and she also founded the STAR Institute. However, sensory processing disorder is still a controversial label. The 2 main publications used for the diagnosis of mental disorders are the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or the DSM, and the International Classification of Diseases, or ICD. Sensory processing disorder was considered for inclusion in the DSM-5 in 2013, but it did not make the cut. And ICD lists sensory integration disorder, but it's under other conditions and not a separate entry of its own. In 2012, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommended that pediatricians stop using SPD as a standalone diagnosis. What were the reasons for that? One critique they have is that sensory integration therapy has not proven to be useful or effective, since studies, on the whole, have been kind of on the fence about it. A meta-analysis of 25 different studies found only 3 to show strong efficacy. However, anecdotal evidence, like parent reports, usually tell a different story. Sometimes the institution, the academic side of things, and the anecdotal side of things really do not match each other. And I can't really respond to this very well because I couldn't read the meta-analysis. It was behind a paywall. When I graduated college, I gained a diploma, but I lost something very important: access to library databases. Other people say that sensory processing issues are only faced by children and that they will automatically grow out of it as they get older. I read an article that was seeming to argue this point about a boy who had really severe sensory processing disorder when he was younger, and it was like the problems went away as he got older, and then proceeded to describe in several paragraphs the occupational therapy he had and all the sensory strategies that he still uses to this day. And it's like, yes, when you give children tools to deal with sensory demands, they will become better at dealing with sensory demands. So that one doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. Also, masking is a thing, so what looks like the person getting better might actually be just them getting better at repression. which I've already stated several times over that that is not a good thing. Honestly, I don't discount the possibility that for some people it does go away with time or change, but that doesn't mean that that's the case for everyone. Another criticism is that because sensory issues are so commonly present in other disorders like autism and ADHD, it's not really clear as of yet whether SPD is a standalone disorder or just a component of another one. Kind of like a chicken or the egg dilemma. Honestly, I do think this has some merit to it. In our current system that we use for evaluating and treating disorders, the label is very important, especially for insurance companies. If you can't prove the validity of a diagnosis or prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the therapy will work, then insurance is not likely to cover it. Kind of unfortunate, but that's how it works right now. So finding the appropriate label is the starting point for just about everything else. If a child actually has ADHD or autism, but their sensory issues are the most prominent symptom of that, and so they get diagnosed with SPD instead, that might result in them not getting the treatment that actually matches their disorder. On the other hand, organizations like the STAR Institute support SPD as a diagnosis and claim that scientific findings promote its validity. When arguing this point, many people will cite a 2013 study published by the University of California at San Francisco. This study had a group of boys with SPD and a group of boys who were typically developing. All of the children were evaluated for autism, but none of them met the criteria for diagnosis. The researchers found that the boys in the SPD group had significantly altered white matter microstructure. Let me explain. So on the outside of your brain, you have a layer of tissue called the cortex, or gray matter. On the inside of your brain, you have another different type of tissue called white matter, and this is what facilitates communication between neurons. When this structure is compromised, it's a lot harder for neurons to send messages as quickly and as efficiently as they should. None of those boys had been diagnosed with autism or ADHD. They underwent additional evaluations for the study, but none of them met the criteria for a diagnosis of either of those disorders. It is the first study to indicate that SPD might exist independently of any other disorder. SPD is a relatively new idea, and it can take a lot of research and time to figure out the best way to describe it that's the most helpful for everyone. All new things go through growing pains, and I really want to believe that all this disagreement and back and forth is a sign that people are really invested in getting it right and not just invested in being right. The system of using labels to describe disorders has benefits, but it also has drawbacks. There's a really strong emphasis on finding the right label, the right keywords to describe, any sort of condition. And finding a label can be very important. However, a label is not a substitute for personalized care and attention to specific areas of need. So what's the verdict? Is sensory processing disorder real? The answer is, I don't know. What I do know is this. The experience of disordered sensory processing is real, and it impacts the lives of thousands of people every day. People from all ages and all walks of life. I'm sure that eventually the medical community will start to converge on some type of label or best practice. Maybe SPD will be incorporated into the definition of autism. Maybe SPD will be described better by another name in the future. I mean, it's already gone through one name change, what's another one? Or it might eventually be recognized as its own distinct disorder and added to publications used for diagnosis. But right now, sensory processing disorder is a perfectly descriptive term for how my life is impacted by my sensory experiences. So that is the term that myself and others choose to use. That is everything I had to say today about labels and SPD. Like I said yesterday, I really love language and how people use it, so this was another fun one for me to make. I also really love brain science, so that brain study just made my neurons just fire with fireworks of joy. I guess I got so joyful that I knocked my glasses off my face. Thank you for watching. I hope this was interesting to you. Remember to do something sensational today, and I will hopefully see you back tomorrow. Bye!